So the next step is I'd like to export the UV layout and take it over to an image program like Photoshop. So I'm going to start with, I'm in edit mode and I have it on face select. And I'm going to go ahead and select all the faces that represent the map area that I want to save out. So I'm going to click one and then I'm going to hold the shift key and I'll shift click to get additional faces selected. And it's a little tricky because some of the faces I can't see at the moment, but I'm just going to use the gizmo over here, and I'm just going to rotate my view until I can see the other faces. And then I'm going to continue selecting using the shift key in the select tool. So shift click to get those faces selected as well. Maybe I'll turn my view back. I'm all upside down. You can see I have all 6 selected, by the way, because if I look on the UV editing panel, I can see the outline, the edges of each section selected. So that's another way I can confirm I've got it all selected. And then to save it out, you go to the UV drop-down menu under UV editing, and it's at the very bottom, export UV layout. And then I think I'll just name mine cube, and it's saved in PNG format. I'm just going to save it right in here with my other lab files. And then I can open up that image in Photoshop, or I could place it into Illustrator, depending on where you want to create your artwork. So right there is actually the cube PNG that it generated. And again, I'll go ahead and open it in Photoshop. So I launched Photoshop and I opened the cube PNG. And then at that point, I went to File and chose Save As to make a copy. And I wanted to change the format to Photoshop format, PSD, just because I want to add layers. So Photoshop's a better format than the PNG for that. And so you can see there's one layer so far, and this is what was exported. So it's kind of nice. You have gray areas for the faces themselves. And then what I'm going to do is start to create more layers and then fill in artwork, just to give you the idea of how you could use this UV map to design something that fits precisely to your shape. So I think I'll hit the plus symbol at the bottom of layers. And then I was going to use the magic wand tool, I think, to select these darker edges. A little detail is I should probably be selecting the layer that I'm going to make the selection from, or let me deselect this a second. Different way to work is I could keep the new layer selected, and up here in tool options for magic wand tool, I could turn on sample all layers. That's kind of convenient because then I don't have to worry about selecting the map layer. I can just stay active on the new layer, and then I can still click in the image area to select a section at a time. So just as an example, I'm going to select one section, and then I'm going to go up to Edit Fill to fill it in with color. And I think under Contents, I'll just choose Color. So it opens the color picker, and I can either choose color here, or I can move my cursor over and click on some swatches I've made earlier. Either way, I'll hit OK. I'll hit OK again. And I filled in this layer. And in my case, I'm going to create separate layers for each section. I just think that's a good practice, and it'll be easier to maybe make changes later. So I think I'll continue filling some of these with color. I'm going to continue creating a layer for each one. And then again, I'm using Edit Fill. And then after I put color in here, I think I'm going to do a little bit more work. You can really use any tool you want. You could paste in photos. You could use your paintbrush and add drawing to this. So maybe I'll pretend I'm creating birthday wrap and I want it to be very exciting. So again, after adding the color with fill, I'm going to do a little bit more work to it. So I finished filling my sections with color, and just to give creative ideas, I think I'll make another layer and show that there's lots of approaches I could use. Brush tool and I think I'll pick white. And I could just draw on it. You know, maybe I want to create some custom wrapping paper. And I still like this idea that as I paint, I know that this artwork is going to go just in the area that I'm defining. Back up a little bit. And we can cross over a little bit. And you can do anything you want. You can put in smaller images. You can have control over where you're placing them. Sometimes I create a layer and a selection, and then I use paste into. It can be kind of convenient to paste another photo into a region. I'll use Magic Wand again to select. I'll select this blue area. And I'm going to turn off sample all layer, by the way, so it doesn't interact with the white. That way I can select the blue layer. And if you use paste into, it can create a mask for you. I'm going to drop in here and let me go ahead and copy. By the way, some of my paste is grayed out just because I haven't copied anything. Let me select a photo, and then I'm going to come back in here and use paste into to drop it into that section. Just to kind of give you some ideas about using Photoshop to create artwork based on your map. So I open this photograph of space, and I'm going to use the rectangular selection tool to select a region of it, and then I'll choose copy, edit copy, or Control C, Command C. I'm going to come back over here where I have the selection already, and I'm going to go up to the edit menu and into paste special, and paste into can be convenient. So it looks like it went right into that shape, but if you look carefully at the layer, it produced a new layer and it created a layer mask for me, which is a pretty nice way to crop that image up. And it can try to just give you a few different ideas of what you might do in terms of your artwork. And then we're going to bring this back into Blender and apply it to the cube after creating the artwork. I've basically just finished this step where I've created my artwork working over the UV layout in an image program. I used Photoshop, but you could use Illustrator or a program like GIMP. And then this is a pretty good comment here. It says save your UVs as a PSD file in case you want to go back and make changes to the layers. So I recommend that too. That's why I started by making a copy of that PNG layout to PSD so I could have the layers. It doesn't really mention here what your options are in terms of formats that you can import. But I want to make a quick comment that Blender supports a wide variety of formats. And I think what I'm going to do is go ahead and save this back to PNG, just so that it's relatively small file size, and then use that to import my art back into Blender. But depending on your project, you can use other formats too, like JPEG would be another option. And then this last bit of advice is smart to make sure you turn off the UV layer so that you don't see that appearing. I don't want any edges showing if there's any gray on the very edge. So I'll go back to Photoshop. I'm just going to hide the map layer. And then I mentioned I was going to make a copy to PNG. So I think what I'll do is use file export. Quick export is PNG. And then I'll just give this a name. I'm going to call mine cube wrapping paper. And then again, I'm also saving the PSD file for future editing. And now I'm ready to go back into Blender. So back in Blender, you're going to create a new material, and then you can apply your image texture to it. So try that out. So I'm going to create a brand new material. And by the way, I'm back in object mode and I just have the cube selected overall. And I think what I'll do is remove the material that's assigned to it and then create a brand new one. So to the right of base material, I'm going to hit the X just to strip out the material that's currently applied. Then I'm going to hit new. And then they defaulted, by the way, to the name material and a number up here after I hit new. But you can double click and make up a better name for that. So maybe I'll call mine material Diane wrapping. And then what we're going to do is add your texture. So in my new material, I'm going to come down here next to base color. And I want to kind of remind you that sometimes we click in here and choose colors, but the little secret to getting into more options like textures was to click the little dot just to the left of the white area. So you go into base color, that's opening up a menu. And then I'm going to go ahead and use image texture. And then I can go ahead and make a new texture. I can open image right here. And actually have done this once already, so I can drop into the arrow to get to my wrapping paper. And you can see it apply right away that based on the UV map that we made from the shape, I was able to create artwork that just fits perfectly. And you can see each color that I created is on one side. I can turn this to view the other sides. Like there's the side with the space image. So I think this is a really good workflow if you want more control over textures or artwork that you're creating for your shape. One little wrap up step now that I'm finished with that, I want to remind you that if you're using textures, it's a good idea to embed them into the blend file. That way, if you send the blend file to me or another person, the texture's included with it. So there's the menu command right there. So I'm just going to go over into Blender, and it was right under file menu, external data, and I'm just going to choose pack all into blend. And then it's basically embedding the textures so that the blend file will travel. The textures are still there. And by the way, you can leave the UV editing window at this stage. I want to remind you that we clicked UV editing tab to get to the split screen, but you can click a different tab like layout, I think is a good tab just to exit UV editing if you no longer need to work with the map. So I'll just do that. I'll click layout and then we'll go to the next file. So I haven't saved for a while, so I think I'll just do a regular save. So I opened up Blend 2 from the lab files, which is a cube. And we're going to learn in this part of the lab how to mark seams and control the layout that you generate from a 3D object. And take a second just to get comfortable. It's weird if it opens in a different view than you expect or a different tool. For example, I might see this open just because mine opened in the scale tool. I think I'm going to switch to select tool. And again, take a second to get comfortable reviewing UV editing, but you can click layout, if you wanted to leave that view. You can zoom in or out here. And it's fine to go back to UV editing while we're working. If we want to see our map, we're going to create the UV layout. I'm just going to change view a little bit to get comfortable again. So you'll see it is just a cube sitting here. Don't forget that you can drag with mouse wheel to view like this, or you can drag on the gizmo like in between the letters as a different way just to view it from different angles. I think it's always good to check what mode you're in. I'm in edit mode at the moment. Usually I'm going back and forth between object and edit. And I think I'll leave it in edit mode for this part of the exercise. I also like to check what view I'm in. I'm in shading view. And as a reminder, you have the buttons that look like circles in the top right that include wireframe view, shading, the materials view, and a render view. And it doesn't really look like there's any materials added yet, I don't think. I'm going to go ahead and just stay in the shading view for the moment. So it's, again, me kind of getting comfortable with what's here and looking around, and then we'll start to go to the next step in the process. I want to just kind of point this out from the instructions, because the point of this is that you can control the diagram or layout that you generate. The other one we worked on looked a little bit like a cross, but maybe it's easier to design this if these top three panels are aligned up. So this is going to show you that you can select edges, and you'll need to be in edit mode to do that for sure. And then once you select an edge, you can use a menu command under UV mark seam. If you make a mistake or change your mind, you can also use clear seam to remove that. So it kind of looks like red lines. And the point of this, again, is that you're controlling how the layout will be generated. And just kind of run through steps. Once you've finished marking, you're going to go to UV menu and choose Unwrap to see it generate the flat 2D diagram. So you actually have a lot of control in this process in generating a specific map. We're learning this with the cube, but the next part of the exercise is going to use this suitcase, which is more complex. But again, it's kind of nice to have a simple shape. I think the first time you try out a process of marking seams or learning a new step. So I'm in edit mode, and I've clicked this button, edge select, so it understands that I want to select the lines in between the shape. So part of the idea is I can click on a line and go to UV menu and start to choose mark seam. And click another one. You can see it's showing it in red if it's marked. You can hold the shift key and click to select more than one seam at a time, by the way, and then go to UV for mark seam. If you accidentally hit the wrong seam, there's clear in here if needed. And then you can also change your view. I'm going to use wireframe view because I think it'll make it easier to see some of the seams in the back that I want to select. I'm following this diagram, by the way, so you kind of look at how it's doing the sides in a way, and then the back surface there to connect it. So let me select a couple more seams and mark them. Mark just one more. And then to make it generate and actually unwrap, at that point I need to make sure I'm selecting the faces. And by the way, I could go to face select and start to click them and shift click. But I also want to give you one other way to select quickly when you want to have all the faces selected. Sometimes I switch to object mode and make sure that I'm selecting here. I'm going to use the shading view. So I'm selecting the entire object. Then I switch back to edit mode and the face select button. In the faces can be automatically selected when you switch back. And then we're going to choose Unwrap to generate the faces and the layout. You know, for some reason, I don't think it did select. My little trick didn't work. I'm going to do it the other way, where I'm in select, edit mode, and face select, and I'll start to click the faces and shift click to get more. And then this is when I need to remember that I need to change the view to get other surfaces. Shift click a few more times there. I think I'll turn it back. And at this point, I have all the surfaces selected, and I can go to the UV menu and choose Unwrap. And then here it's generated the diagram, I think over in the UV editing pane. Let me just click to deselect, and you can see that it's generated all the shapes for me. And just as a reminder, after you've created that layout by unwrapping, you could save it. I just remind you that you can go to the UV menu on the left here if you want to export the new UV layout. Like maybe I'll call this one cube number 2 as a variation. I'll save it. And it's normal that if you deselect, you may not see the diagram anymore on the left, but it's still there. Like for example, if I just simply start selecting faces, then I can see them appearing again. So they're still there, just you're not seeing them unless you select faces. So we're finished seeing that process. Now we're going to try it again with a more complicated file. And this really, I think, is more realistic. It shows something of the complexity that you might create and how you can work with applying imagery to these different services by creating a map. So you're going to be marking seams again and generating the UV map. So you're finished with the last file. You can save and close that, and then go ahead and open up UV editing number 3 to get the suitcase file open. So I've opened up the suitcase, and take a second just to look around. Mine happens to be in Scale Tool. I think I'll switch to Select Tool, and I'm just going to take a second to get used to the shape, take a look at it. And then you can go back to the instructions, and we're going to start to mark seams as our next step. So for the suitcase, we're going to mark seams and separate some of the major sections to make it easier to apply imagery. For example, a good starting place would be to select all of the edges on each face of the suitcase, the side of the suitcase. The instructions kind of mentioned you can select a section, unwrap to view it, then keep marking seams and unwrap again. That's not a bad idea. Kind of shows you can view it in progress by picking unwrap repeatedly while you're working. Or if you notice a mistake, you can clear a seam, add more seams, and then choose unwrap again while you're working. We're also going to try to select the handle itself to kind of flatten that out and have it be separate from the sides and the rest of the suitcase. The handle is going to have a different material assigned to it. So just basically you can recognize the handle. It's a little different area from the rest of the suitcase. It'll be easier to apply imagery to it. And I want to demo as I do mine in Blender that it's up to you what layout you achieve. Once you unwrap, I want to show you can move pieces around. So just for example, I know that I want to have the handle have a metal texture and the rest of the pieces, the sides, front and back of the suitcase have a leather texture. So I might want to move these further away from the section that represents the handle just so it's easier to position art on it later. So you don't have to match this layout, just kind of make sure you can recognize major sections so that you know where to put your texture on it later when you're back in Photoshop. So let me go over here and I'm going to switch into edit mode. And then I've actually marked the seams already. You can see them in red. And I'm in wireframe view. And I want to remind you that to mark the seams, you would want to be in the edge select button, choosing seams, shift clicking them, and then using mark seam. And then at this stage, I'm going to switch to face select because I'm ready to have it generate the map and see what it looks like. And I'll show you a little trick here because I want to select all of the faces to unwrap, and there's quite a few here, so it's going to be a pain to try to click on these manually. But when you're in edit mode and face select, you can go into the select menu and just choose all here to select. And as long as you're in that face mode, it'll understand you're selecting all the faces in the document. So that was fast. And then I can go to the UV menu and choose unwrap. And then I can start to take a look at what it generated. So over here in the UV editing panel, I'll remind you, you have different tools here. So I'm going to switch to the select tool for a moment and kind of look at this. And I think what happened is these two big pieces are the face. Don't forget, when you click on things, it'll highlight it for you. And I think these little row of pieces on the right represent the handle. But here's what I'll show you that you can make adjustments for your own convenience. I think it'd be easier for me if the faces are isolated. So I think I'm going to shift click to select those, and then I'll switch to the move tool. And I think I'm just going to pull those straight up and then straight over. Just looking that they're more separated from the pieces they're going to have a separate material. Then I'll switch back to the select tool. It's in face select right now, by the way. And then this time I'm going to drag around all the pieces that represent the handle to select those. And then I'll switch to move tool. And again, I'm just going to move them a little bit so that each little chunk that might have a different material is isolated. And that looks good to me. I think that's a map that I could work with. So I'm at this stage ready to save this as a file that I could then export and take into Photoshop to create my artwork. I need to select all the faces again in order to export my layout. So let me just go to select menu, select all again for convenience. And then I'll go to the UV editing panel and the UV drop down menu to export the UV layout. So let me go ahead and save that. I think I'll call it a suitcase. And then I'm going to open that in Photoshop. So I'm in Photoshop. I opened up the suitcase PNG. Let me go ahead and take a minute and make a copy of this. And I'm just going to change the format to Photoshop PSD so I can have lots of layers. And then I'll start to create a new layer for my artwork. And this time I'm going to use some of the materials provided. So I'm going to go File, Open. And some of the assets that came with the lab include a textures folder. So I need this aluminum and leather, and then there's some travel stickers also. Let me start to open those up. And maybe I'll just pick two of them that I like and open them. And then you want to start composing them over your layout. Bear in mind this section at the bottom is supposed to be the metal handle. That's where I want to place my aluminum. So I might start to maybe select and copy and paste, copy that, and then I'm going to paste over here to create a new layer. And I'll start to use the move tool. It doesn't really matter if there's extra, but I want to have it at least cover the sections that include that handle area. And you can do things like move this. I can scale. I could use free transform if I want to change the size of the layer. And again, it may not matter if there's extra, but if you want, you can also delete sections if you have more texture than you need. So I'm going to go ahead and place the leather over the other sections, and then I'll experiment with placing the travel stickers too. Okay, finished creating my extra layers. And I've been resizing with free transform and positioning. And then at this stage, I'll go ahead and do the export. Quick export is PNG. I'll call this suitcase art, maybe number 1 in PNG, and I'll save it into my folder. And then I'm going to go back into Blender and make a new material and see how this looks applied to the suitcase. And it's really important to keep the PSD file, because I find in my practice a lot of times I come back and make changes. Like maybe the sticker will be upside down, I'm not really sure, or just I might not like the position and want to refine that. So again, make sure you keep the PSD copy for further editing. And by the way, we're on page 7 of the instructions. So you've already done these steps where you edited, moved around pieces of your UV map. In this example, they're even enlarging the side panel, by the way, so you can do things like that. And you've done this step 2. We exported the UV map and we went over into Photoshop to create our artwork. And it's letting you use more than one texture. So at this point, let's go ahead and go back into Blender and again, see how it looks applied to your object as a new material. So I switched back to object mode, and I think I'll go ahead and view this in the material view so I can see things that occur. And then I'm going to go ahead and create a new material. So we go ahead and click the button to switch into material properties down in the property panel. Then I'll start to make a new material. And I'm going to double click that and just name it anything that I like. And in my new material, I'm going to come down to that little section where it says base color, and I'll click the yellow dot to open up the menu and use image texture. And then I'm going to go ahead and open my new image, my suitcase art PNG. And look at that, you can see it applied, and look at the control where I have the textures going where I want, and I have metal at the top. And then I can evaluate the stickers and also sizes of things. Like it looks like this part is stretched, so I could probably go back and refine that section, like shrink it back in the Photoshop file. I might turn this and then save out the texture again if I like. And that's it. Basically finished with the lab. At this point, I could go to layout view. We can just sort of leave the UV editing. I'm going to do a file save. And then you could submit this for the lab. Congratulations.